This is the story of how I stupidly got into Harvard. I wish I had something easier and better to tell you. That I was enrolled in boarding school at the age of 2, some kind of feeder kindergarten that was direct academy admit to Harvard or something. But sadly, no. I had nothing going for me. Came from a background of immigrant parents, had no special skills or talents, no special connections. One thing I had going for me, though, was I was an idiot. I specifically thought that if I didn't get into Harvard, I would be homeless. To me, there seemed to be a direct relationship with the amount of success, happiness, financial well-being you had later in life with the college you attended. So why not maximize that by getting to the best school possible? Really didn't see any other option or any other way. The context in which you grow up really matters. In my family, in my mind, that was the only path available to success. So that little seed was planted, and it was up to me to try and figure out how to get there. First step, everybody knows this, even an idiot, is that you need to get good grades. Okay, easier said than done. And the second thing you needed was leadership. I distinctly remember sitting in the back of the car, half asleep, while my parents were talking in the front about what it takes to get into college. And I distinctly remember them talking about this buzzword, leadership, leadership. As a kid, I never really understood what that really meant. Leadership? You need followers? Are you building a cult or something? And I realized one day later that I was making it much more difficult than it actually had to be. I mean, who's going to follow me, a wimpy, short high school kid? Only other wimpy high school kids, right? Being a leader in high school does not mean you need to change the world. All it means is that you need to get a bunch of other high school kids to follow you. With that in mind, the plan was going to be a lot more simple. And then I realized another fact. You don't really need to get kids to follow you. You just need to have a title. You need to get something on a piece of paper I later learned was called a resume, and you need to show that to Harvard and get them all excited about these random titles on a piece of paper. So with that in mind, I had a very specific plan. So what is the easiest thing to do when you want to become a leader of something and you have no experience or background in anything? Obviously, you just start your own club. And that's exactly what I did. I started the breakdancing club. And this is back in the day when Asians weren't really known for dancing. And what's the best thing about creating your own club? You get to elect yourself for all the positions. So I made myself everything. President, vice president, board member, social chair, treasurer, anything you can mention. Anything you can come up with. And boom, right there, I had 5 leadership positions on my resume. It was looking good. I was on my way. Realistically, the only reason I got into breakdancing was to impress girls. Being the wimpy, nerdy Asian kid that I was, saw this as a ticket into stardom. And while yeah, it helped, but what it really helped was me getting into college because this became something I milked. It was my X factor, and Harvard loved it. I incorporated breakdancing to my personal statement. I talked about how I overcame stage fright and doing something completely out of my comfort zone. And it was really the X factor, I think, that pushed me over the edge and made me look a little bit different from the typical Asian kid, maybe in that background. It didn't really help me get any girls though, but it did help me break out of my shell, which was cool. No guy in my school could really dance. Maybe I was the only desperate guy trying to get attention, I'm not sure. But the point is, dancing allowed me to be admired from afar. And that's because mom wouldn't let me date anybody in high school, so what could I do? Okay, well that's percolating on the side. I had to come up with a plan to get good grades. I had a couple things going for me at the time, namely that I was tutored from a very young age by my dad in math, a subject I later grew to hate with a passion because all my summers would be spent glued to a textbook that he would buy himself from some random store online. This is back before Amazon was even a thing. And I'd be doing practice questions, memorization, and I fundamentally had no idea what I was doing, but I got good at the mechanical aspect of doing math, which helped a lot in school. But still to this day, math is a very weak subject for myself, and I think it's fundamentally due to the way in which I approached it. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. It helped me in school, and it helped me realize that school is nothing but a game for you to just simply go through the motions. And it actually helped free a lot of time to concentrate on the other subjects in school where I had no inherent advantage. But I'm not sure if in your school you had that weird kid that was insanely smart in one specific subject. That was me, and I would be bused every day to like a different school. I mean, I was in middle school at the time, so I'd be bused to high school and take math classes with high schoolers and be bused back and take classes like everybody else. And I realized something. If you're special, people will do special things for you. This yellow school bus, literally, I was the only one on that bus. And I wish I could say that I exploited this advantage further in other areas, but sadly, no. This was the one and only time. Well, the other subjects in school I excelled at just through plain old hard work, essentially. But this is the part of the story where I realized I simply had to do things that other people were not willing to do. Think of a Venn diagram. One circle represents all the things that the average person does. The other part of the Venn diagram is all the stuff that you are doing. If you can minimize that intersection as much as possible and go the extra mile with the things that only you are doing, that promotes your ability to succeed. So what are the things that I remember doing? Treated each homework, each exam as almost Olympic level events. This shifted my mindset to take everything very, very seriously, and every single point mattered. This is like life or death kind of a thing, right? So I remember being in the shower and reviewing topics in my head as I'm thinking through things, having a very specific game plan every single day, every single week to make sure I kept on track with everything in my subjects. Memorize every little fine detail that would matter in subjects. And maybe, to be honest, it was a little bit of overkill, but when you approach school with this kind of mindset and everybody else simply doesn't care, you really start to stand out. Keep in mind again, this was just a simple public school where people didn't really care or do too much. And you can decide for yourself if this is the kind of environment you excel in, but I was kind of maybe a big fish in a small pond kind of a thing, and maybe at your school or in the future you'll have a crushing realization that you're not that special because everybody else is probably just as good as you are, or if not smarter. But well, in this case, nobody cared in my school, so me doing the extra little bit of work really pushed me far. And then it was figuring out what other little ways I could game the system. And at my school, if you took a whole bunch of AP classes, those classes would have a higher grade point average, kind of boosting your GPA, so to speak. So I took as many of those as I could, while also leaving out behind some of the other ones that were hard or time consuming I didn't really want to invest in. I think one of them was AP Bio, for example. It's kind of ironic since I'm a doctor now that I didn't want to take AP Bio, but you got to game the system for what it is. And honestly, people were probably just had other better things to do with their life. And they probably knew that if you didn't get into Harvard, it's okay. You won't be homeless. They're probably having fun, enjoying life, and doing other fun things with their time, not meticulously crafting their life for this one particular goal. And maybe that was my main thing, was this unifocular, singular focus to this one task that kept me up every single day. Looking back, this is not something I'd recommend for anyone. This is not how anyone should approach studying, because it doesn't really build you for long-term success. If all your energy is devoted to beating a game in the present moment, you kind of forget what the purpose of education and learning really is. Your goal really should be to learn, to understand, to build up these building blocks so you can actually construct some sort of building inherently useful to yourself or maybe to others. Building a passion to know what it is you want to know, you know? Anyway, let's go back to the leadership position type of a thing. I realized being the president, vice president, treasurer, whatever of the breakdancing club wasn't going to cut it, and I needed to have more things on my fancy resume to impress those Harvard people. So what did I do? I kind of treated it as a game once again, and Pokemon was really big at the time, and so I realized I need to collect all these different gym badges from all these different clubs out in my school. And what were some of the most awesome and prestigious clubs that were there? I kind of went through the whole list and thought about what it would take to kind of get there and what kind of people I would have to meet and impress. And I came down with a couple of things on my list. Number one is I knew I needed community service. That's the buzzword that everybody cares about. And so the one big community service club in my school was called Key Club. And this was a pretty big club, 200 people or so. Everyone's trying to rack up their community hours, but yeah, I needed to do that too. But really the point was to become the leader of this group. And I think it was sophomore year, I became the vice president. And this is the part of the story where it's kind of interesting because AOC, obviously everyone knows who she is. She's super popular. She was actually the president of this club. Yes, she went to my school. It's crazy to know that people in your school become famous one day while you're just stuck being a YouTuber somewhere where nobody knows you. But anyway, so she was the president, I was the vice president, and to be frank, she did a pretty bad job when she was president. I think she just treated as whatever, coasted, and there was really no inspiration to do anything different. And me, being the cutthroat crazy guy that I was, wanted to take her down. So when the election season started up again, I had a whole campaign ready to go, a whole speech and everything. There was like a debate between all the candidates. And obviously she was running again for re-election, but I was going to take her down. And maybe I took things a little bit too far. In my speech, I basically laid out all the reasons why she did a bad job this year and how she was lazy and didn't do anything and how I would do everything so much better. Needless to say, this was a simple high school debate thing of a club that most people didn't care about, and people were shocked. A lot of her friends never spoke to me again or were super angry about it. Funnily enough, the teacher who sponsored the club was like clapping on the side and said, "Wow, very good job." And I guess for adults at the time, these kind of things are a dime a dozen. But I really took it to heart, and I felt really bad that I made her feel really crappy. I think she may have cried at the end of that speech, and then later became sort of a pariah in that group and brought her flowers and everything to try and say I was sorry. It didn't really matter because I got the position. I became president. A lot of people voted for me, I guess, because maybe she was lazy. I don't know. Anyway, that lit a fire under my butt because now if I didn't do a good job that year, I would be a huge hypocrite. And that was a lot of pressure for a high school wimpy kid to handle. But it was a good learning experience. And from that experience, I pushed myself out of my comfort zone like crazy. And I knew people were expecting a lot now. So I talked to all these people from our town to establish different community events, fundraisers, painting gazebos, mowing lawns, I don't know, community service type stuff. And every week, the kids in my school would show up to the meeting knowing that a lot of different things would be there for them to do to fulfill their obligations to random colleges that they wanted to go to. So that was a very stressful experience. And I literally counted down the days to when my tenure as president would be over, because then that pressure would be gone. But anyway, that was a very interesting experience that really shifted my whole high school career. The second club that I had my eyes on was the newspaper, and our newspaper was called The Voice. And I joined as a measly writer, and I wanted to become an editor of a section because that would be good leadership stuff, right? But no, I had my eyes set on editor-in-chief, but who would make me editor-in-chief? I had no skills, no direction. All my time was spent doing political random stuff for Key Club, the community service organization. So I was jealous of all the people who had artistry skills, graphic design skills. One kid in particular kind of made the whole newspaper so beautiful and awesome looking. And I was like, dang, he's going to become the editor-in-chief. What am I supposed to do now? But here's the very important lesson I learned from this experience. None of that matters. The editor-in-chief at the time, for whatever reason, took a liking to me, took me under his wing, and finagled it so that I actually did become editor-in-chief my junior year. And to many people's surprise, especially mine, I jumped from being a writer to editor-in-chief. I felt like a huge imposter, but it didn't matter. It was a very shiny badge I could then put on my resume. But that just goes to show you a little taste of real life happening where nepotism is real, folks. But it doesn't matter if it achieves your goal, at least in high school. Can't say about real life. Third thing I concentrated a lot of my time in high school on was science research. So another thing about trying to become a leader in all these different things is just to say yes to as many things as possible. And at my school, there was this program that recently developed for science research. And the idea was that you would go out, read a whole bunch of research, and find a mentor in some sort of scientific field to kind of bring you into their lab or clinical field of study. And you would, over a year or two, build up your own research project and present in all these different competitions. So I did, and it was a pretty awesome experience, to say the least. And it taught me another lesson, namely that the research itself almost doesn't matter. I'm sorry, all these lessons are pretty jaded type old man lessons, but the truth is my research project sucked. But after dredging the data, we did find some significant p-values, and with that, I built an entire story and spun it in a way where it sounded like groundbreaking research, even though secretly I knew it was nothing. But because of that, me and my partner at the time went through the gauntlet and went through many competitions and impressed a whole bunch of judges and got a whole bunch of awards. That was pretty awesome. That was pretty helpful to the application, I'd say. Another couple shining badges under my belt. And the final thing that I concentrated my time on was tennis. That was the athletic sport that I gravitated to, namely because my dad really loved it and he spent almost every waking hour training me in tennis if he wasn't training me in math. And though I wasn't the best of the best, there's one guy on my team who probably could have gone pro. I was pretty decent, joined the varsity team, won a couple of championships. It was good enough to put on my resume. So I think all this put together painted a picture of me to Harvard and made me look much cooler than I actually was. And that's the whole game, is you gotta sell and market yourself in a way like you have never done before. And the earlier you can start that and plan for it and be a little bit of a gamer in terms of gaming the system a little bit, you too could get far. Not that it really matters, not that this should be your goal at all in life. But at the time, again, I thought, why isn't everybody else doing this? Don't people not want to be homeless? And that is my story of how I stupidly got into Harvard. But realistically, I probably shouldn't have been there. After I got into Harvard, I was the biggest slacker possible. And honestly, I would have done a lot of things different. But that's a story for another time.